Hey everyone. This is the call, and what I want to talk about in this video is actually interesting. In the sense of I've been studying a lot about this idea of there being a sacred secretion. Now I knew about this from yoga and tantra and Taoism, the idea that there's some essence that is secreted. However, I've recently discovered some esoteric Christian stuff, and I guess that wasn't too recent. It's about 15 years ago I discovered this stuff, but I really wasn't able to put it all together until rather recently. Um, so the sacred secretion, there's a few things that in order to cultivate it, and again, what sacred secretion is, in essence, is when we raise our Kundalini or we raise our latent energies. And how we're doing this is largely through a deconditioning process. The Taoists would say we're looking to become, um, I guess, prenatal is the condition that we're wanting to achieve once again. The Christians might say we're looking to become like a child again so we can enter the kingdom of heaven. Heaven is the higher centers of the brain, right? So we're talking about the head center, the ajna, et cetera, et cetera. Now there's things that we can do physically, mentally, emotionally, but this is very much a purification process, right? It doesn't mean you have to live purely. You just have to return, quote unquote, 10% to the Father and on a regular basis. And again, it's once a month. We have to return 10% to the Father, 10% to the Father. The Father, once again, is the higher centers in the brain. Um, Before I continue rambling, so down below the video, you're going to notice two links. One link is for the formula, which is a free PDF for those of you who are interested in cultivating sacred sexual practices, as well as increasing the magnitude of your orgasm. Also down below the video is a link for my Sovereign Tantric Sexual Energy Coaching Program. That is for men who are looking for a total reset on their relationship with their sexual energy. The coaching can happen in person. If you're in Chicago, it can happen over Zoom, or there's a video-based version of the program. Again, you can go ahead and check out that link. So going back to this idea of a sacred secretion, there's various things we can do to cultivate it. The other word is we're preserving. We're not actually cultivating it because we're given this every single month, right? So it's not like we're taking something from outside and forming it into something new. We're simply receiving this every single month. We're receiving this charge, this psychophysical, energetic seed that we receive every single month. All we have to do is to not waste it, right? So preservation is a much better word than cultivation. So what this particular video here, though, is about, it's about specifically about what do you need to look out for mentally. How do we get caught up in wasting this seed through mental fixations, which are not our own, right? So now to keep this really simple before I start to show you the human design system, which is going to make it a little more complicated, to keep this simple, I want you to understand that there are ways in which we condition the world, right? So we condition those around us, and then we are conditioned by the world. In other words, there's an in and out. Those of you who are familiar with Tantra and sort of the cycle of energy that happens when you do the connection practices between partners and you're doing breath work and all this other stuff, you start to notice there's a greater flow of energy between. In this particular case, though, this is about the content of our mental emotional field and how each one of us has very specific content. This specific content will pass through our mind or we will feel it viscerally. Now, this content can mislead us if we are unconscious, right? So it always goes back to, are you cultivating yourself in meditation? You can do all the tricks you want, the breath work and the transmutation practices and all this kind of thing. If you're not meditating, if you're not cultivating the witness, you will get caught up on chasing things and ideas and behaving in ways which are not authentic. Okay, so again, other words, not authentic means you're living your not self, right? You have a self and a not self, right? But what you're doing is you're caving to the external pressures coming in from outside of you. Pressure is the word I want you to keep in mind before I show you this chart, because in essence, the human being is, well, we function, our life is animated as a in essence to channel pressure outward, right? So we have pressure coming from above, pressure coming from below. Two primary pressure centers, head center and root. And it's all pressurizing to move outward. It'll move outward through doing, through reaching out, through speech, okay? Generically. Okay, so now going back to this idea here is these mental themes that cross our mind are the things we're meant to look at, not necessarily meant to do, not necessarily meant to figure out, not necessarily meant to respond to. However, if we become progressively more conscious, these are areas in which we become very wise. Now, I'll leave it at that. Let me go ahead and show you the chart that I'm kind of talking about. All right. So hopefully you can see this chart. I have a little blue cursor here that I'm moving around. I can't really tell. I'm using Zoom here to record this, and I can't tell what you guys see. Anyway, hopefully you see the chart. So what I have on the chart here is some individual. This individual is primarily an emotional being, meaning this red triangle here. This indicates that person's an emotional being. So, but I don't want to get into a whole lot of details about this character, this person. Instead, what I want to show you is that there's a combination of the red, so these little red centers, that is where this particular individual is defined. They function as self from these places. These are the things that they express, they express and they experience, they probably tend to do very automatically. This is what's consistent for them. The areas that are black, that are open to whatever varying degrees, those areas are areas in which we are taking on pressure from the outside world. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through all 9 of these centers, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information about them. Primarily, I want you to focus on the quote-unquote not self theme, or when they are open. So when they're not colored is when they're open. So when they're not colored in, like I said, each one of these centers has that theme that you either feel or think. And so we will start with the root. So down here, the root, this box, this square. And oh, by the way, if you want to do your human design chart, there's a whole bunch of different sort of websites you can go to. This is the one I particularly use. You can probably see the URL here at the top, bantu.com. I like this particular website. Anyway, there's a bunch of sites that offer this, and it's largely free. But what you're looking at here just really quickly is a combination of the Tree of Life from Kabbalah, the Chinese I Ching, which are the little numbers, the 64 numbers inside all these centers. And finally, it is the imprinting, or what determines the pattern that you see there is based on your tropical astrology, as well as I believe it's 33, you don't quote me on this, I believe 33 degrees prior to your birth. So in other words, this system has 2 imprinting periods, not just the moment of birth, like your natal chart might reveal, but also this idea that there's about 33 degrees prior to birth is another imprinting period. So for instance, I'm a Pisces, but 33 degrees prior to my birth, I was, and again, don't quote me on the degrees, my subconscious, or my body, which is the pink sort of lavender color here, that is actually, in my particular case, is a Sagittarius. So I have a Sagittarius-like energy, even though I was born a Pisces. Okay, so the combination of these things all give you this chart. So now going back to the centers, we're going to start at the root first. So down here at the root is a very visceral pressure center, right? So what this root is, and this individual has an open root. The open root says that this individual may do things too quickly, right? They may feel this intense pressure. It's an adrenal pressure they're taking on from those around them. So those are the environment around them. Okay, so it can be animals even that we end up picking up this pressure from nature, a lot of different things, right? So this individual probably feels much more comfortable in nature because the they're not being pressurized quite as much, or they're being pressurized in a much more natural way. So the idea here is that this individual might do things too quickly. And oftentimes, if you do things too quickly, you make mistakes. So this person has to learn to slow down, right? There's also a tendency for people who have that center open to get caught up in, well, there can be like adrenaline addiction. Like you get caught up in this intensity, because that's the other thing is when these centers are open, they are magnifying that energy. So, in other words, a defined root has a consistent pressure, right? There's a consistent pressure and a consistent relationship with that pressure. This individual is going to magnify the pressure and they'll feel it more so. Again, this individual is to become wise over time about how to slow down and to realize that the pressure may be there, but they don't have to respond to it. So hopefully that's clear. Now we're going to move on to the next center, which is the instinctual center or the splenic center. This is a very ancient center. Again, this is another center that we tend to feel kind of in a visceral sort of way. The splenic center is, it's very much linked to intuition and instinct. Now, intuition and instinct, one of the descriptions I was reading is it's like this person has ears and noses and eyes all over their body, right? So intuition is that sort of deep knowing. It's that deep knowing. So now if somebody has that center, this instinctual center defined, it's colored in, as in, let's say they don't have this center over here, which is an emotional wave. And I'll get to that in a moment. But this instinctual center is meant to function spontaneously in the moment. These folks who function through the splenic center as their primary awareness center, these are very crisp, clean, clear individuals in the sense of they can make decisions in the moment spontaneously. And by the way, some percentage of the population, just so you understand, these two types of people exist. There are people that are existential, crisp in the moment, and then there's people who are never in the moment. It's okay, right? So those of you who are crisp, existential, in the moment, and spontaneous, don't get frustrated because not everyone is like you, right? You're going to want to give people advice and to point things out and like, why are you take so much time to make a decision? No, we don't have your equipment, right? The mechanism is different. So those of you who have this open, like this individual here, what they're going to feel is kind of uncomfortable, insecure. There's always going to be a feeling of, let's see, I'm going to read what I got here written down. It says no fixed sense of well-being. Okay, again, because this is connected to your immune system in a lot of ways. The splenic center is what? Part of the lymphatic. The lymphatic system is very much tied to our immunity. These people aren't always going to feel good. So the temptation here is, rather, the mental emotional impulse here is to do things to make themselves feel better, right? So that could be drugs and alcohol on the negative side. However, if it's to do things to make yourself feel better, and let's say the individual is more conscious, that can mean learning to eat better. That can mean doing those things which actually strengthen your immune system. So I think that's all I want to kind of mention about that particular center. Just keep in mind in a lot of ways, what ultimately that boils down to is the individuals who have that open are amplifying fear. Okay, so those who have that center colored in, they're able to utilize fear intuitively and instinctually, meaning the individuals walking down the gangway at the airport, they get a visceral fear that moves over their body. The plane is going to crash. They have to decide, I'm not going to get on the plane. Anyway, you have to honor that, right? So that's how instinct happens. It rises up once, it doesn't repeat itself, you have to listen. But again, if that is open, your fears are largely stupid. You have stupid fears. It's mental. It's a lot of mental, visceral kind of fear that it's really not yours. Again, you're amplifying it. All right, so next we're going to go over to the solar plexus. This individual has that defined. And what that defined solar plexus mean is an oscillation. And some of you who've got this defined, you're not going to like hearing this. The oscillation here is from hope to pain. Okay, so in a lot of ways, folks who have this center, their way of being is emotional ups and downs. Don't pathologize it. Uh, everything in our culture gets pathologized because there's money being made, right? So doctors pathologize everything, and we are conditioned through largely the medical establishment. So what do? We pathologize everything. So if you experience ups and downs, don't pathologize it. It's very much who you are. You're meant to not be spontaneous. You're meant to take your time to figure things out, to feel it out, right? Because it's up and down. You feel good, you don't. You feel good, you don't. Back, forth, back, forth. Hope, fear, hope and pain, hope and pain, hope and pain, hope and pain, right? It all sounds kind of extreme, but this is sort of how it functions. Now, those of you who have this open, well, you're amplifying the up and down, the hope and the pain of others. So in other words, you might actually feel this more extreme than someone who has this defined. However, you have to ask yourself, because most likely if you do not have this defined, you're meant to be crisp and in the moment. You're meant to function through your gut instinct. You're meant to function through, or your instinctual awareness, going back to the splenic center. I'll get into the gut instinct here in a moment, but so again, the idea here is if you have this center open, the solar plexus open, you're amplifying the pulsation, the up and the down of those who have defined emotional centers around you. And so the mental thing here that you have to understand is that mine? If you feel some emotion very intensely, is it mine? Right? So because you're meant to be crisp and in the moment, you can always turn to presence. So if you're present, you're not really truly experiencing the up and down. So I tend to think a lot of people who get labeled quote unquote manic depressive are actually people who have this open because they're channeling and amplifying the up and down, the hope and the pain of those around them as well as the environment around them. But they have to learn to center themselves, to find presence, and to realize, and again, to ask themselves, is what I'm feeling actually mine? So in other words, don't trust what you're feeling. I know that sounds weird to say, but in this particular case, don't. Don't trust what you're feeling. Something else that comes up here is, and this is sort of like everyday interactions, those who have this undefined, again, open or not colored in, there may be a tendency to avoid conflict with others, again, because you're feeling and amplifying other people's emotional stuff. So you may tiptoe around things. So you want to make sure that you not necessarily you have to be confrontational, but also don't withhold your truth, right? So acknowledge the fact that if you can witness these ups and downs of these emotions, don't necessarily avoid conflict, don't necessarily avoid interaction, and don't avoid giving others the truth if you perceive that. So that is the solar plexus, both defined and undefined. So moving on to the next center, we have the sacral center. It says service here when I put it over it. I kind of agree and don't agree. So let me get into it in a moment. So again, this center here, right in the middle of the chart, is that sacral center is the sort of reproductive center. So we're talking about sex. It is the creative. It's about the energy. I shouldn't say it is about being creative. It's not. It's the energy for creative, right? So the energy still has to move up to what it is that it's creating, right? So this is simply the visceral push or the pressure to create, the visceral push or the pressure to have sex, the visceral push or the pressure, in essence, to get work done. All right, so work is the word. Those who have this defined have a consistent access to life force energy. So in other words, they have to do satisfying work, right? So you wake up in the morning, if you're doing the right work, you feel satisfied. By the time you wear yourself out throughout the day, you work. By the end of the day, you're like, you can go to bed, right? You can go to bed not feeling frustrated. Now, if you're doing the incorrect work, in other words, you're not honoring your gut instinct, because folks who have that colored in, again, if it's defined, it's colored in, there is an access to a gut instinct. The gut instinct, for those of you who have a gut instinct, it says uh-huh or uh-uh, right? Now, that is directly connected to your life force. The story here is you don't make decisions from your head. If you make decisions from your head, it's not a dependable place to make decisions from your mind or your intellect, because the mind can oscillate between this and that. If you have a gut instinct, it says, this is good for you, this is not good for you, okay? So you have to honor the gut instinct because it's a time traveler. It transcends time and space, and it tells you if your life force is appropriate for a particular person, situation, place, or whatever it may be. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, if you have this undefined, if this is open, like this individual here, with an undefined center, sacral center, what you end up getting here can be an addiction to working too hard, right? There's no consistent flow of energy here. So this person needs to learn to calibrate. Well, just how much work am I supposed to do? Like, they may not have a very good relationship with work. They may constantly feel like they're in the wrong job because they're not supposed to be a worker bee. Okay, these are not worker bees. And people who have that open, they're here to function slightly different. They're here in some ways to learn to work with life force energy within themselves. They're here to learn to work with sexual energy and not to become overly identified with the sort of intense energy stuff, right? The intensity of getting addicted. Well, I mean, let me not get too off into the weeds here, but again, the idea here is that they have to learn to become correct in how they're using their energy, okay? So, because again, you can burn yourself out really easy if you have this open. The other thing about that center being open is, let's see. Aside from being addicted to stimulation, something else is sex might become kind of mental, right? So you're keeping in mind, you're amplifying the pressure from those around you. Okay, so amplifying the pressure from those around you. And in this particular case, you're amplifying the pressure. You may be amplifying sexual energy, and that sexual energy may be coming in, and it may come in through, again, a visceral feeling. So the horny feeling may rise up just kind of randomly and spontaneously. And again, it has nothing to do with whether it's yours or not. In this particular case, it has to do with what you choose to do with it, right? So, hey, I'm feeling the sexual energy. What do I do with it? Oftentimes the mind will attach to it and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. So in other words, particularly if you have an open sacral center, watch out how you condition your energy, your sexual energy specifically. Pornography, that's not a good thing for you. All right. So with all that said, we'll move on to the next center. Let's see. I think I have the ego center next. Yes, I do. So the ego center is this little triangle that only has 4 activations in it. Okay, or 4 potential activations. So the ego center is, I'll do that. I have the willpower to back it up. All right. And I know those of you who have this center, if you go to your human design chart and you find you have this little red triangle there colored in, it means you have the center. It means that you can actually, as a personality, as an ego, say, I can commit my energy to this. I can commit my energy to that. In other words, you have access to willpower. Those of you who have this open, there is a feeling of a pressure to prove oneself or to improve oneself. And what do I mean by that? There is inherently a low sense of self-worth if you have this open. And again, this is internal dialogue, internal feelings, this low sense of self-worth. And you end up in essence being around people who have this defined. And when you're around people who have this defined, their energy will sometimes feel pushy, like, well, that person can get this done or that done. Why can't I too? I like to use the Tony Robbins example here because I think I looked at Tony Robbins' chart a while back, and Tony Robbins had this defined. And now, if you don't know who Tony Robbins is, he's like one of these like success coach guru types. And he sees huge crowds of people and he does his speeches and he really hypes people up. He gets them all pumped up. You can achieve this and you can achieve that. And again, he's coming from a defined ego center. So you can, from his perspective, all you have to do is apply yourself from his perspective, right? But the reality is in the presence of Tony Robbins, everyone else kind of feels like that. But only some very small percentage of the people actually can, right? So what folks like this, when they have this center open, over time, they have to kind of learn to realize that they don't have to prove themselves, right? They don't have to prove themselves. They don't have to improve themselves. What they have to do is to realize they have inherent self-worth. You don't make promises you can't back up in this particular case. So let me see if there's anything else I should mention about this. Yeah, like I said, just kind of keep that in mind is that sometimes, there's a lot of false ego that rises up from people who have this center open, a lot of bragging about oneself. And again, what people who have that open are trying to do is to pump themselves up, to kind of hype themselves up into doing something. So this is how people can overcommit their energy. And they don't actually have the energy to back it up. Once again, something else that can lead to heart conditions, weakened immune system, and on and on and on. All right, so we're going to move on from the ego center. Let's move up to what they call the G center here, which is it's kind of like a high heart. So you have high heart, low heart. High heart is this, low heart is that. Low heart is associated with the actual physical heart. It's about ego identity. High heart is, this is more, at least physiologically related to the liver, and it has to do with identity. And actually this corresponds with Taoist belief, or at least, some Taoists or traditional Chinese medicine practitioners believe the seat of identity is in the liver. And it's because of how many physiological processes actually happen through the liver. I'm sure there's other explanations as well, but that's how I see it. So now the G center here, it says love when I hover over it. This individual has this defined. Now, basically what this means is that if you have it defined, the sense of, I guess one's identity relative to self is defined, it's consistent. One's relationship with who and what to love, one's behavior, as well as one's direction in life is defined and oftentimes known. In other words, it's kind of built into them, right? So in other words, they may, in the end, have a fixed trajectory. Okay, now if you have this open, if this area, the G center is open, there's going to be questions, again, mental questions, or sometimes feelings, again, because you're amplifying the pressure from those around you. Is this the correct person for me? Is this the correct place for me? And again, what the individuals who have this open need to learn to understand is that they don't have to have a fixed identity, right? You don't have to augment anything to become this fixed identity in order to sort of fit in. Actually, you in a lot of ways can behave a bit like a chameleon. You can shift based on your environments. So in other words, you go into some particular environment, and if it's a healthy environment for you, you're going to feel good. You're going to feel healthy. If it's a bad environment for you, you'll feel not so great, right? So your identity and how you kind of feel, or at least your relationship to love and direction, and things like that, well, that's going to change based on who and what you're around. So you need to become and again, I tend to think that if you ground yourself in, let's say, nature, it's going to be much more easy for you to sort of hone in on what your true identity is. But again, just keep in mind, it's not meant to be fixed. Okay, so that, I know this could be kind of frustrating for a lot of people who have this open. They may bounce around a lot between relationships, or they may move a lot. There's just a lot of questions about place and people. All right, so moving on up to the throat. The throat is an interesting center. This person's got a lot going on in the throat. So the throat center is the quote unquote, the center for manifestation. I had to think about this for a bit. But in essence, everything from above, from the head center, And everything from below, from the root, is pressurizing out. And I'd like to think it pressurizes out in a number of different ways, but one of the primary ways in which we pressurize things out into the world is through the throat, through communication, and also through speaking the words, right? I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. In other words, it's a center for manifestation. In the human design system, if you have a connection like this person does, they have a connection goes from, in this particular case, the voice is that of emotion. I feel like it, then I don't feel like it. I'm enthusiastic, then I'm not enthusiastic. Those are the pressures moving towards the throat. So, in other words, this is an inconsistent social being. Sometimes they're into being social, sometimes they're not, whatever. But the idea here is that it's through this center that we start to, at least verbally so, we can transform, mutate. What were the other words I wrote down here? Transformation, manifestation, mutation. If you have this defined, you have a very fixed communication style. And let's see if there's anything else about if it's defined. No, not really. I mean, like I said, the voices in terms of how this throat will communicate, and again, it's going to communicate in a very fixed way, but only fixed relative to what's connected to it. So this individual has their G center connected to it, it has their Ajna connected to it, and it has their emotional center connected to it. So otherwise, there's different voices here coming through, but it's all from within, right? It's all from within. It's part of their authentic expression and how they're attempting to sort of mutate the world around them and to condition the world around them. So now if you have this open, I'm just going to read this because it was a little difficult for me to quite digest, but it says, no consistent voice. There can be a pressure to speak, which is fine, but people who have an open throat need to realize that this pressure to speak doesn't mean they have to, right? So when you do communicate, it's about making sure you're not doing it in a forced way. Also, there's seemingly, let's see, a pressure to say something or to do something. Again, this is a center for manifestation. So you may feel a pressure like, I need to do this, or I need to do that. I need to say this. I need to say that. You don't have to. It's okay to be silent. That's one of the key wisdom pieces here. It's okay just to be quiet. It's okay to be silent. One of the phrases that's associated with this has to do, this is something you want to watch in terms of what's crossing through your mind, is, am I trying to attract attention, right? So people will say things or say they're going to do things in order to draw attention towards them. So, which can be good or bad. Again, it depends on the consciousness level. An entertainer who has an open throat actually, I think it's actually pretty appropriate to have an open throat if you're an entertainer or a singer or whatever, because what you can do is you can sort of modulate your speech. You can use different voices. I think a lot of entertainers who have good voices, etc., oftentimes is from the pressures outside themselves. They can say the right things. Politicians might benefit from having an open throat, on and on and on. Again, so it's many voices possible here, as opposed to a fixed voice. Moving up. So we have the Ajna center here. The Ajna center, or the third eye center, is about how we process information. So it's about how we process information, and people who have this defined can process information in a fixed way. Once again, in a fixed way. So in other words, the pressure to think tends to be very fixed, and it's they can be, if you have this defined, you can feel certain about your opinions, the concepts, and the theories you hold. So I don't want to use this term like open mind, closed mind, because as a culture we tend to misinterpret those phrases, but it's kind of true here. So a little bit. Anyway, so someone who has this defined could be a little bit closed-minded. What that simply means is they're here to look at something specific. They're meant to process information in a specific way. It's part of how this individual navigates their particular matrix. They're meant to navigate it in a particular way. They're here to navigate their life path mentally in a particular way. So again, from point A, from point A to point B, this particular individual, because it's defined, is meant to move along a particular trajectory and to look at things in a particular way. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, if that is open, this would be the open-minded individual. Again, I don't mean that in terms of like, hey, I'll try anything or do anything. Like that's not open-minded as in this. It means that there is a potential for a very flexible way of thinking to look at something this way or that way. And so the idea here is to be okay with the fact that there is no certainty, right? In the sense of like, there's no definite certain, you can't become super fixed on your opinion, right? You don't become super fixed on what it is that you believe, right? It's just to allow the mind as it goes through this and that to simply allow it, right? To allow it, right? And it's okay to, like I said, to not have a fixed way of thinking because there may be an anxiety here, right? So oftentimes when we look at the head center, you also kind of think about like what happens in the solar plexus. Oftentimes the relationship between the diaphragm and the head center are very related. And how should I say that? So if you have an open center here, you may want to get real comfortable with your breath. In other words, when you inhale and retain the breath, you notice stillness. You exhale and leave the breath out, you also potentially notice stillness. If you have an open head center, there could be an anxiety that rises up, right? And this rises up because your mind is like moving too quickly. It's racing between this and that. It's trying to figure everything out, et cetera, et cetera. So your diaphragm most likely is doing that as well. So the best way if you have an open ajna here is to find the certainty through your stillness, right? So you find your presence. When you find your presence, that's where all the guidance comes from. The true guidance, your true self, your Sat Nam, okay? So that is the Ajna center. Let me go ahead and look at my notes real quick. Well, here's the quotation I read that's relative to the Ajna center if it's open. It says, am I trying to convince everyone I am certain? Yeah. And finally, it says, no need to have a fixed mental opinion about anything. All right, so that is the open mind. So moving finally up to the head center. The head center is this little triangle at the very top. That is the pressure from coming down from above, the crown chakra, etc. The head center here is the pressure to think. And this is true if it's open or closed. Again, we are beings that are essentially here to channel pressure. And so if this is open, though, you're magnifying the pressure. So someone who has this defined, which is rare, as you can see, there's only 3 possible activations in the head center. So it is very rare to have that defined. I don't remember what the percentages were, but it's pretty rare. So the defined head center can be a source of inspiration from the world because they're receiving things through their crown in a very defined, fixed way. In other words, the pressure is consistent. And then when they're around certain people, oftentimes the people around them are also going to feel inspiration in a more consistent way. I don't remember who I was listening to, some guru type. He was talking about, he was talking about human design, but he was talking about it relative to the head center here. And he said that those who have the defined head center tend to beam their impression of God to others. In other words, the inspiration which comes through the crown chakra, they can then sort of influence those around them. And so those around them may actually have more visions. They may have, more inspired thoughts, but only in the presence of the person who has that defined. Okay, now if you have that open, you're amplifying the thoughts from the world around you. It's the pressure to figure things out and to act on things that have nothing to do with you. All right, so I'm going to repeat that. The pressure to figure things out and to act on things that have nothing to do with you. So what you need to do is to cultivate the witness again. So it's cultivating witnessing. When you find your true name, your Sat Nam, your presence, then you can witness everything simply passing by. And then you can find the light at the center part of your head. The light is obscured for those with an open head center. The pineal gland and a lot of its excretions are obscured and reduced for the lot of people who have open head center because they get caught up in what is coming in, right? So again, amplifying the thoughts of everyone else around them. So finally, it says the quotation here is, am I trying to answer everyone else's questions? So in other words, you can also waste a lot of time trying to figure things out. So with all that said, if you can understand how each one of these open centers works, you can, through meditation, etc., you can then learn to stop wasting energy. And as you stop wasting energy, you can then start to cultivate the sacred secretion, the Christ oil, the Amrita, whatever we want to call it, cultivating the Jing into Qi into Shen, all these higher sort of mystical spiritual understandings that are very, very, very much connected to our actual physiology. So anyway, in summary, stop wasting time with things that have nothing to do with you and be present, and you will be able to cultivate the Christ oil. Thank you all.